Hello, and welcome to the University of Utah's Press's podcast. I'm Hannah New, and with me today are two fantastic poets, Heather June Gibbons and Jericho Brown. Jericho Brown chose Heather Gibbons' manuscript for the Aga Shahid Ali Poetry Prize, and Gibbons' book, Her Mouth as Souvenir, came out in the spring of 2018. Heather June Gibbons was born in Utah and grew up on an island in Washington. She is the author of two chapbooks, Soar Songs and Flyover, and her poems appeared widely in literary journals. A graduate of the Iowa Writers' Workshop, she has received awards from the Fine Arts Work Center and the Vermont Studio Center. She lives in San Francisco. Jericho Brown is the recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Brown's first book, Please, from New Issues, won the American Book Award. His second book, The New Testament from Copper Canyon, won the Einsfeld-Wolf Book Award. His most recent collection, The Tradition, is also from Copper Canyon and coming out in 2019. His poems have appeared in BuzzFeed, The New Republic, The New York Times, The New Yorker, The Paris Review, Time Magazine, Tin House, and several volumes of the Best American Poetry. He's an associate professor and the director of creative writing programs at Emory University. So thank you to the both of you for coming in today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So I'd like to start with the title, because I went under some renditions, and I know you two talked about the title. So you guys mind talking about?
What was the title before? Ooh, it was awful. What was it, Heather?
It was Sound is a Pressure Wave.
Yes.
I don't think it was awful. I just think that it wasn't the right title for this book.
Yes, I'm so glad you changed it.
Well, and
No, I
you
like
told
this
me.
title. I like this title. I love this title. There were several phrases that we sort of went over and through, and there were a few that I liked, but you settled on this one because why?
Well, I remember you saying that the title I had just wasn't right for the tone and like the emotional energy of the book.
Yeah.
And that the title I had wouldn't grab your eye at a bookstore.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be like, ooh, what's that about?
Yeah.
Perhaps because it was a complete thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas Her Mouth a Souvenir seems like it's midway through something. It's in medias res. It has a kind of tantalizing, what's that about quality to it. So that had something to do with it. But I think it comes from the poem Nature, which isn't a key poem in the book to me. But I have the line here it's toward the end of the poem. Imagine 16 different possible futures for wildfires, her mouth as a literal souvenir. And she mutates the gross mammalian heart, and then it goes on and on. So it was her mouth as a literal souvenir in the poem, but I liked her mouth as souvenir better. I think part of why I chose the title is that there's a lot of figuration in the book. There's a lot of simile and metaphor and a lot of associative leaping, one thing as another thing as another thing. So that felt like the right kind of move to have in the title to suggest that. And also the word, mouth is a good word. It's mouthy. It's expressive. It's sensual. It's a little bit provocative, as we've discovered. And then souvenir, is memory in French and also, of course, in English, the thing that stands in for the memory, the memento, the object. So there's a kind of like autonomy and a standing in for that happens just even in that. So, it felt like there's a lot of memory and there's a lot of mouthiness and a lot of figuration. So it seemed like it worked.
I feel like I love the title. I really do love this title because it gets at so much of what's going on in the book as it relates to music. There's a lot of music literally in the book, and the poems are quite musical. And so there was something about pointing to the mouth and calling it a souvenir that seemed to have something to do with the poet singing, right? With the poet referencing music. And with holding the book, holding the poems, this is your gift, this is your souvenir, this is your memory, this is the way it will always be archived. And so I thought it was actually quite perfect. I think it's quite perfect. I'm glad you. Whereas the pressure wave title seemed to me only to get at the music, but not the memory of it. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And there's something about this title that points back to the poet herself, which I really love, and points, I think, back to the poet's or the speaker's anxieties in the book, which are so well written and captured. So.
So Jericho, in your foreword, you say, "My attraction to Gibbons' poetry is rooted in her ability to organize life's chaos without dulling its energy." If you could expand upon that statement and maybe tell us why you selected her manuscript out of all the others, and maybe what the selection process was like.
Well, maybe I can work backwards in these questions, right? What the selection process is like is that you send me, did you send me one box or two? I think you sent me a box.
I don't know how it came. I think I sent you 15.
I know I did not get them. People ask me to do these things, and they want me to do electronically. And I tell them no, that they have to, because I have to feel like I'm holding something. I have to consider the poems, and I want to make the best and the right decision. And there's so many good poetry manuscripts out there. And so I don't want to, if I'm going from my Emory email to Facebook to looking at manuscripts, I'm not going to consider them in the same way that I would if I have to pick them up and sit somewhere and read them. And so I'm looking at those pages, and usually what I do is I sort of look through what I'm sent. So on the first day I have them, I look through, and by look through, I'll read a first poem or maybe a first 3 or 4 poems, and then I put them down and I start thinking, oh, this is what these people are doing. And I also read the last few poems, and I'll read the middle poems in every manuscript I get. I'd usually do something so that by the time it's over, I've read what amounts to, in the first iteration, I've read what amounts to 100 pages, but from all of the books. And then after that, that sort of gives me an idea of who I want to go back to, right? There's something that I've read already that tells me you should go look at that some more. But I let that play in my mind for a little while. And there's a way, I said this last night at the reading, Heather's book had always been sort of set apart from all the other books. And so I'm reading through all the other books, and I'm going back to her book, and then there's a point at which you're at 2 or 3 books. You do this until you're at 2 or 3 books, and the other ones sort of fall away, and they end up on this other stack, and then there's a stack of 2 or 3, but then Heather's was like 1, and then there were these other 2. So all of this is sort of me mapping out the dining room table and sometimes the living room floor, of just, looking at the piles and thinking, oh, I should go back to that. Look, it's over there. So and I remember reading Heather's book and getting to the end and thinking, this is probably it. But then I still had reading to do, and but it was still, no matter what I was reading, I kept going back to like the one that I kept thinking, this is probably it. So that's the how it gets done. And I also try to do it as quickly as I can. Like when I get the boxes, I try to hurry up because I know people are waiting.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, there's so many, people are sending out not just to you, but to a lot of other contests. I thought I went quick, but there was one that was taken even in the midst of me reading, I remember. And I was so glad it wasn't the one I wanted. I'm so glad. You sent me that email and you were like, this one's already been taken, so you could take it out of consideration. I ran back and looked at it, and I was like, oh, thank you, God. So then, wait, what was the second question?
Expanding upon the statement of Gibbons' poetry is rooted in her ability to organize life's chaos without dulling its energy.
Yeah, so I sort of mentioned anxiety, but there's these love poems that are really fretful and beautiful. There's that poem "Poppy" I love, which seems to be about a mother figure. There are all these poems, and there's a sort of mystery to them, which I attribute to the mystery of the life we live. And so there's a way that, and often the lines are long. There's a lot of leaping in these poems. And I think these poems are really thick and heavy in metaphor and simile. And there's something about all of that where I really felt like I was reading a book that was out to teach you how to read poetry, right? That it was making use of these things so that it can show you something not just about its material, but about poetry in general. And so I think that's what I mean by organized. There was something about the use of tools, the poetic devices, which made me understand that indeed all of the mess of life was being put together on a page for a purpose. And so I think that's how she does it, and I think that's what I enjoy about it, right? There's a certain kind of distractedness or maybe distance that I see where the poet is looking at what amounts to be really chaotic situations, sometimes very traumatic situations. And she looks at these things as if they are materials, as if they're paints, or as if they're pieces of wood, and she starts building, or she starts painting, she starts making things out of them. And it's really beautiful to see that because, when you read it, you're like, don't touch that. That's not wood. That's not paint. That's fire. You know what I mean? But she touches it as if it is material she can move around. And I love that about this book. Did I answer all the questions?
You did.
Oh, good.
I got more later. But
Okay.
So Heather, I first wanted to discuss food and place in your book. I really want to discuss place because just in your bio you have 3 different locations. And then throughout your book, countries come up, places such as a view from a castle tower, a seance in a parking garage. So, I don't ever feel like your poems are about place, but place is definitely a huge part of your poems. So maybe briefly touch on that, but I'd also like to discuss this sore Eros connection that you were talking about last night.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. There are a lot of different places, and I've lived, in Washington, Iowa, Indiana, Massachusetts, now California. And I've traveled quite a bit, but not as a young person, but more a little bit older as an adult. So I think about it as a sense of displacement in the book, that it's not that the speaker is not really ever at ease or rooted in any one place, and even when in one place is wishing to be in another or remembering another, so that there's not that sense of real presence, which I think actually does relate to the Eros poems, the Soar songs as well. That there's a kind of, that it's more about the reaching and the leaping and the wanting and the longing and the remembering back, more than about what is actually happening in a present that would be rooted in a particular place and time. And I had the amazing experience of being able to spend 3 months in Italy. I spent a lot of time by myself, and it was so beautiful, but it was also very lonely. And just, I had a hard time. I was living in Indiana, which I didn't enjoy very much. It was a place I felt a lot of friction with, a lot of resistance to, which actually ended up being really generative for me. And then I was suddenly in Italy, and there was no friction. It was all, I thought it would be maybe a little cliche, and it just wasn't. It was just beautiful. And rich, and I didn't really know what to do with that, because I felt like I didn't have my edge. I didn't know how to write about beauty. So I don't know. Those are some of the things in the book about place. I think also, places like parking garages and castles and suburban landscapes and, chain stores and domestic things, just that I've moved a lot. And while I was writing that book, was processing and still in different realities of having different jobs, and including office work and marketing and waiting tables and things like that. So those kinds of environments, and then becoming a homeowner and getting married and being in this little town, and so that all of that comes into play.
It's also why the voice is so big. I was talking about this in the car with you last night. That's something when I maybe I shouldn't have done this. I'm a bad person. But when I met Heather, one of the first things I said to her was, "Oh my God, you're so small." And but I think I said that because the voice in the poems is so huge and so encompassing of so many places and so much space that it seems to be able to see. And there's also a lot of just plain great vocabulary in this book, and so the voice is always sort of aware of images and of words that you might not at first. So you have to remember, oh yeah, I do know that, or oh yeah, I do know what that looks like. But something about the voice in this book is very wide, and it can sort of grab at things. I mean, it's Whitmanian in that way, I think. Yeah.
Will you read us a poem?
Sure.
I do have several that I really liked. So, Smell the Moxie or Exploded View, Self-Portrait as Tongue. And then you read one last night that I really liked, My People.
Isn't that a great poem? I think that was the poem that sort of pushed me over.
Really?
Yeah, when I see My People, a title of a poem like My People, well, first of all, it reminds me there's a poet by Margaret Walker Alexander called For My People. And so I started thinking about that, seeing the title. But it also, that poem is just so interested in standing up in an identity as at the same time that it questions eschewing that identity. So I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, well, I'll read that one.
But you should read the Tongue poem.
I should?
'Cause you didn't read that last night, did you?
I thought I did.
Did she read Tongue and Souvenir last night?
No.
Well, then we haven't heard it.
It's the Self-Portrait as Tongue.
Self-Portrait as
Self-Portrait as Tongue.
Sorry.
Self-Portrait as Tongue. When the acupuncturist examines the film on my tongue, I'm afraid she'll see I'm prone to night sweats and sobbing at the dolphin show. I hate the way they're made to do tricks for food as if they were simple humans with fantasies of interspecies friendship. The acupuncturist nods, says I run hot in the head and torso. Basically, my meridians are fucked. In California, roses bloom in winter and plaques announce their breeding names like racehorses. Dark Lady, Crimson Glory, then it's Moon Dance for the win. In an ad for gin, a woman in a leopard coat walks a ferret on a leash. No, the woman is on a leash in a leotard in an ad for what? I don't know. Worrying generates heat, which shows up as deep red at the tip of the tongue, the only muscle in the body not covered by skin and therefore very telling. A strange kind of stress, waving my hands back and forth in front of a touch-free dispenser, waiting for its sensor to sense me. A strange kind of convenience to access at the tap of a fingertip so much information without the ability to understand it. Cataract means flawed vision, but also waterfall cascade. Dolphins only seem to smile as the trainer commands them to jump so high they splash the front row in what will be their 5th show of the day. They can think of the future, but can they also choose not to? The audience erupts in applause. I stick out my tongue and say, ah.
I really like that one.
Yeah, it's a good poem. It's strong. The book's good.
Yeah, it's a good
It's
book.
got some really strong poems. It's really great, yeah.
Jericho, do you mind reading a poem out of Heather's book?
Oh, yeah, sure. Give me the book, please.
Okay.
Can you reach me? Thank you. I'll read My People then. Is that okay?
Yeah. Do you want page 7?
It's early.
It's
10.
It's marked. Yeah, I think it's...
People's page 10 are always very good.
Huh.
I'm always noticing this. I have more to say about the number 10. What? Heather's giving me this look is that why you moved my poems around? No. I didn't know it was going to end up on page 10, but no, this is My People. My people are invisible. They are all around me. There is no one else. I wander these rooms. I walk on frozen ridges of mud and under the boughs of blighted hardwoods. Still they whisper, with all the leaves gone, you can really see the ground. My people walked over mountains and buried children on the trail for a prophet who led them to a lake of salt. Now they polish the temple in their secret clothes, for my people are luminous. Though I can't see them, they whisper, you owe us. Forgive me, for I went to the woods hoping to catch leaves as they fell and woke up in the den with Grandma and Fox News. Maybe it's the clarity of a fever that I miss, or maybe I really do believe. Maybe the hell I believe in has degrees.
So Jericho, you mentioned in the foreword that Heather is an emerging voice in American poetry, who you expect will be just as feared as any other voice that insists on the truth. So I want you to discuss two things: the role of truth in poetry, which is a very specific topic, right? And the role of truth in this book.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll say first the role of truth maybe it's the same answer. In this book, I'm just really interested in an examination of the world, and that world includes the self. And that as meticulous as she is about looking at things for what they are, she is also about looking at her own past actions, her own emotions, her own beliefs for what they are, and then goes a step forward and looks at them for what they may be. And I think that actually comes up in that poem that I just read, the My People poem, which is why we have to have Grandma watching Fox News, right? So there's this veneration, and then there's this question, right? Is that okay? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Or you owe us. You still owe us, So I'm really interested in that. And I like the way that in these poems, the past is present, the present is future, that there's all sort of one moment that gets entangled. And I think when you're doing things like that, you are dealing in truth, right? When you, as a poet, can look at the world in front of you and know that it always was the world, and that it always will be the world, right? And so I'm taken by that in Heather June Gibbons's poems. In poetry in general, I just think it's a good idea for people to understand that if you're still saying what you knew you would say, you haven't really started your poem. That the poem begins when you start saying things you didn't expect to say. And if you're saying things, if there's something subconscious coming through you that has you writing lines that you somehow did not know you were going to get to, then you're probably dealing in the realm of truth. And that through that, not, and that's sort of when I know I'm writing. I mean, there are two things that happen. One is I start saying things. I start writing lines and sentences where I say to myself, oh, do you think that? And there's part of my brain that's asking, why did you write that down, Jericho? You don't think that, do you? Do you know what I mean? And then the question comes through for the next lines. Do you think that? Show me. Show me if you really think that. Or show me that you don't. If you don't, you think you don't, but you said it. Why'd you say that? Do you understand what I'm saying? And I think those are the kinds of things that are happening in the mind of the poet that let the poet know, oh, I'm in the midst of truth now, and I better hold on to it, and I better keep doing it in this moment. I better push through this moment in my poem. And often we find that when we get to those moments, we can lob off the first half of our poems. And then I also think, I've noticed this with my students, we're at that point in the semester where they get to a truth in a poem, and as opposed to dwelling in it, they almost immediately say a cliche. It's like they'll get to some huge big thing, and the next line is, it's raining cats and dogs. Like, what? Like, because they couldn't deal. Yeah. They did not want to maintain that moment. Nothing about our culture, nothing about any experiences that we're having as a nation right now make us believe that there is value, though there is. But nothing about our society makes us believe that there's value in vulnerability or that there's value in intimacy, right? And if you want to be a poet, you have to believe there is value in this. That has to be the quest. Like, imagine vulnerability being the quest. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think that is what I mean when I talk about truth in poetry, getting to the point where you're saying something you did not expect to say, and dwelling, once you're there, dwelling in it.
I am nodding vigorously over here, which you can't hear, but I have so many responses to that. So much of it resonates with me and how I think about my process of writing. I feel like, for me, writing poems is not about capturing or rendering the product of thinking and feeling, but rather the process of thinking and feeling enacted, and not in an artificial way, like really enacted in a true way as the poem is being written, so that there is, as you say, Jericho, the opportunity, and I try and cultivate the opportunity for surprising myself or even shocking myself, to write a line and say, do I really think that? For me, if I stop there, I'll never write the rest of it. So I don't try and answer that question. I just keep going, which maybe speaks to a lot of the momentum that I end up working in this book. It's like you just keep writing the momentum, and don't look back too much in the poem until the revision process, and then I do look at that. But yeah, I was just thinking about with my students those lines also where they write a line and it's the best thing in the poem, and it's fresh and feels true. And there's a desire. Well, on some level, there's a recognition of that, and there's a shying away. Yeah. I call them hot spots in poems. Yeah. I'm like, that's a hot spot. Like, you're supposed to actually dig into that and stay there.
Get hotter.
Get hotter. Yeah. Don't just walk away from it. But I think there's something about that kind of the truth of the poem, and being able to stand. Sometimes the difficulty of staying inside that truth, to not walk away from it.
I think this is why I've become so interested in formal work recently. There are a lot of I have a book coming out in April, and there are a lot of sonnets. There's a form that I invented called a duplex, and there are all these rhyming poems and poems in pentameter. I don't know what I was going through, but I think a lot of it had to do with me trying to find another way to get at saying what I did not expect to say. So if I create a boundary, if I tell myself this line has to be 9 syllables, and I know I got to get something across when I say the 9 syllables I say, then I'm reaching for things that I otherwise would not have reached for. I'm seeing words. I'm thinking of ways of giving over information in ways that I never imagined before, because there's a little bit of a boundary there that's saying you got to get it in right? And so you have to reach for things you otherwise would not reach for. And then once you get them, you have to say, did I say that? Do I believe that? Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah, there's a kind of, it's almost a cliche, I think, to say there's freedom in the constraint to form.
Mm-hmm.
But it's true, like many cliches. And also that, it's a safe place for them to take risks because you have that scaffolding, you have that container to pour something into that maybe would be formless otherwise, or feel like it might just, spill out or not be something that can be dealt with or stay together.
You guys, you mentioned your newest book coming out from Copper Canyon, and you just posted the cover.
It's so good. It's too bad this is like
cover.
Not visual. This is, so no one can see it, but everyone can see it if they go like looking. I'm going to put it on Facebook at some point today.
Yeah.
But you can also see it online. Put in Jericho Brown, The Tradition, or go to Copper Canyon Press, and it's up at some other places too. I think it's up at Blue Flower Arts.
That's gorgeous.
But I'm really excited. It's the most beautiful cover ever. I'm so excited about it. It makes me so happy.
Your cover for the New Testament is always really...
Thank you so much.
Put a lightning bolt in my heart.
Yeah, thank you. I love it.
Heather's cover also is... I've got covers on my mind because we're dealing with covers right now for spring 2019. So you guys mind talking about... Are covers important?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess we were talking about this a little bit earlier, that I think maybe for all writers, but I'm going to just say particularly for poets, or at least particularly this poet, that the cover, the image, and the way that the design works just feels so important because there's a way that those design elements can convey a lot about the tone and the emotional register that maybe isn't coming through just in the title. I think for me, the image was something that really drew me in. I was insistent about not wanting something that was too literal for this book, because I don't think it's really a book that's about the literal. And I like the colors. I like the messiness of it. I like the shapes. Yeah, the cover image of my book was something I stumbled upon when looking at images. I knew that some contemporary painters that I really loved, but I didn't think we could get them because they're very well known, famous in museum collections. But I was looking at contemporary paintings that were in the style of painters I like Amy Sillman and some like that. And I found this artist, Sarah Boytz Yoder, and she had a whole body of work that I found really compelling. But it was the kind of thing when I found this particular painting, I really just knew that was the cover. And then there was a whole drama of trying to get a high-quality image file of it, because it had been sold and was on someone's wall in their living room in a different state. And she was trying to ask I said, do they have a good camera? Can we send someone over there? But I was so happy that she let us use the image, and really happy with having it represent my book and collaborate with the title and be the beautiful container for it. Do you want to say something about covers?
Did you have a hand in your covers?
Yeah, for Copper Canyon, I actually found both images. It's really funny. The cover for the New Testament, it's a painting by Leon Bonnat called the Barber of Suez, French 19th century painter, and it's one of the few times he depicted black people. And it's, the cover, it's the barber's giving someone a shave, but there's something about it that is it's either romantic or very brotherly or murderous, right? Like it looks like he could be about to slit the
sensual.
guy's throat, right? There's something about it that's sensual at the same time. It's very interesting. And I thought it was perfect. When I found it, actually, it was after the book. They had already started doing work for the cover of the book, and Copper Canyon has people they call in and call on to do such things. And I was like, okay, because I hadn't found a cover, and I was still just glad somebody had taken my book. Do you know what I mean? And I remember a friend of mine, the poet Elmar Wilson, sent me, he knows I just love art, and he sent me a link to this painting, The Barber of Suez, just for me to see it. And I said, Lamar, you do realize this needs to be the cover of my book. And he had seen poems, but I don't think he had seen the entirety of the book. And he was like, yeah, I think I see that. So I immediately called my my editor, Michael Wiegers, on the phone. And I said, I was calling. For some reason, it just seemed like an emergency. So I just kept calling him. He didn't answer the first time. I was like, I'm not leaving a message. Answer the phone. You know, it's like one of those situations. So he does answer the phone eventually. And I said, Michael, I have the cover for my book. He's like, well, Jericho, you know, we've already kind of passed that point, and we're looking at some other covers, and I've sent you some samples. And I was like, Michael, I have found the cover for my book. Well, you know, I'll look at it, but I don't want to make any promises. I was like, Michael, I have found, you know. And he says, okay, you can send it to me. And so I sent it to him. And he calls me back. And he says, oh, Jericho, you're right. It's the cover for your book. He's like, we're on it. So I was glad that it worked out. And then for this cover, interestingly enough, I Googled Black Boy with Flowers or Black Boys with Flowers because I knew so much of the book. So much of the book is about race and about Blackness. The book is called The Tradition, and it's also a book of many forms and a book of pastorals, which is hilarious. There's so much like flora and fauna and rabbits and trees and flowers. And I was just like, who are you, Jericho? Like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? So I knew that I wanted something like that. So I sort of just Googled that. And it was the first image that came up. And it's by Ralphie Burgess. And who's a very young and wonderful, talented artist out of Texas. And I sent it to Michael, and he said, we'll work on it. And so they reached out to her, and they came up with a deal, and it became the cover. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, it's a great cover.
I'm excited about the book. It's the best book I've ever written in my whole life. It's the best writing I've ever done. Poetry-wise, it's like, oh, okay, finally, some good, great, come on, work, Jericho.
You say it's coming out in April?
Yeah, well, you know, it'll be at AWP in late March. Great. So, yeah. I think people are pre-ordering it now, though we're not supposed to announce that you can pre-order it. I think it's like so weird how these things like populate on the internet. Yeah, that's why I'm looking at you, because you know, like, can y'all do something about this? There's so many things that are not like very good for public relations. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't surprise people with things.
Yeah. No, there isn't anything I can do.
Yeah, okay.
So it's like someone leaking your album.
Yeah, it's very weird.
I'm excited for your book. You know, one of the great pleasures of this whole process for me was when Hannah called me to say that I had won the prize and told me who the judge was, because the judge had been anonymous before, right? I was just doubly thrilled because I'm very genuinely already a huge fan of Jericho's. And I had taught his poems and, you know, learned from them and loved them very much in a way that I, you know, almost felt some of my favorite poems, especially contemporary poems, I have a hard time teaching them because if the students aren't feeling the poem, I don't even feel like I can really let them into it. You know, it's like, if you don't get this, like, I don't know what to tell you, you know, because, and there's something about it. It was such a particular pleasure to hear you read Lush Life, track 5, right?
Track 1.
Track 1, and then track 5 is Summertime.
Summertime, yeah.
And those are two of my absolute favorite poems from that book that I've taught. And yeah, so I'm really excited about your book coming out.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to wrap up with another poem from Heather. I'm going to let you pick whichever poem you'd like.
Okay. I think I'll read Exploded View. Exploded View. Etched into each fallen leaf is a diagram of a bare tree. Things come with their own directions. They tell us what we are about to see will likely appear senseless. We say we want no part in it, but no one hears us fall in the woods. We stagger around with the sound off, the sky a pale bruise, burst capillaries in our cheeks, recording force the way a horizontal cross-section reveals growth rings in a tree. We are told no one was harmed in the making of the shattered window mere sugar glass, but I felt the floor quake. I saw a woman's skin lit like a lamp. I remember driving under a blue bridge. Later, I will produce a histogram of the image to better manipulate the colors. A somewhat random sample of 100 observations from the normal distribution, shards of ice angled on the creek, breaking against each other. We hadn't seen anything of this magnitude before, except for the time the hounds found the wounded elk. Blood in the snow, a red telephone, and a black telephone in the snow. Then a spotted orchid. What I am showing you is the exploded view. Cracked bird bath in the snow, fallen tree, monograph by a noted dendrologist. His children, heirs to his headaches, will remember how he squinted at the page, his papers thawing in spring to the contours of bark. That's a poem that, this is a case where just staying in the poem, this isn't so much about like emotional risk or difficulty, but just the weirdness of it, that I remember getting to the point, except for the time the hounds found the wounded elk. I was like, all right. And then, okay, there's blood in the snow, and then a red telephone showed up.
That's crazy, man.
I was like, yeah, and there's another telephone.
Yeah, why
which
not?
is even weirder. You know, it's like if a third thing was a totally different thing.
Yeah.
But it seemed weirder to, and it wasn't like, oh, what could I put here? You know, in a self-conscious way, that would be weird. It was like, I just really felt like I was in the world of this poem, and that's what was there, you know? And so I had to write it down. That was the truth of the poem. And I, you know, sometimes I read these, and has this ever happened to you? I read a poem, and, you know, and it's one I wrote a while back, too, and I'm like, I don't even know what was that world of that poem? You know, so it's kind of like you shed the snake skin, and there's like this, the poem becomes an artifact of some kind of thing that was happening when you wrote it, and then it's I can re-enter it to read it, and it sort of comes alive again, but I don't really totally recognize it.
I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of ad-libs. You know how like when you listen to someone, when you listen to a record you really love, and there are always moments where a singer is just making sounds, and without those sounds at those moments, the song would not be the song that you love. I mean, I think I started thinking about this pretty soon after the death of Aretha Franklin, and just thinking about how she chooses to make certain sounds that are not actually words, just like hollers or moans or grunts at certain parts of the song. And part of the reason I'm thinking about it is because I think that's similar to what we're doing when we're poets. Because sometimes I finish a poem, you know, revise a poem over years. And if you were to ask me what it's quote unquote about, I would be like, I don't know, girl.
You tell
me. I just know that it's right. I know that things are where they go, where they belong. So, yeah.
Well, I was thinking about Aretha. I mean, especially Aretha Franklin's live recordings are so amazing because you just see how she's doing that live and definitely like the focus on those the sounds, the nonverbal.
I'd really like to thank the both of you for
Thank
this
you.
wonderful conversation. And this has been Hannah New with the University of Utah Press.
Hey, yeah. Woo.
Thank you.